You are watching Lesson 2 for Fall 2020 for continuing students of the Dance of the Eye and the Hand.
Good to see you again. Today, we're going to spend some time exploring the structure of a painting, or the bones of the painting. If you recall, when we studied the 6 methods, the second method talked about using the bone structure in defining a painting. And all that means is that building a painting of any kind, landscape, birds, flowers, orchid, you start with the bones. So the bones are what's underneath the skin, underneath the muscles, organs around it. If you're going to be beginning to look at a painting, you need to mentally remove the last layer, the skin, remove the muscles, remove the organs, and look at what is the underlying structure that's defining this piece. Now, on some pieces, that's very easy. It's easy to see the structure, easy to work backwards and put it back together. Others are much more challenging. And so I'm going to give you a couple of examples to, on your own, just look at. And what I want you to do is to think about what would be the last thing I added. In most cases, that might be the inscription. What would be the thing before that? Might be color, might be the dots. What would be the thing before that? And just analyze, and this is again training your eye, to look at and to reverse the process back from what came last and before that and before that and before that. And if you carry that all the way through, at some point you'll come down to the bones of the piece.
So our first example is a plum blossom by Chibaishu. Fairly simple composition and process. If you would start at the end, you would remove the inscription and the seal. Maybe then remove all the color work. From there, I probably would start with some of the dots and the smaller branches, and ending up down to the base of it, the bones of it would be the main branch. Here's another example from Chibaishu called Walk on a Windy Night. I would start with the rock that's in the foreground, its outline, then the tree trunk, perhaps the tree needles. Then I might add the figure in the horizon line, and then the shading for the first rock, the shape for the second rock, and then my dots. Lastly, I would add the color that would define the moon and perhaps the vines and the dots trailing off the tree. Finally, then would add my name and date, and then perhaps a seal to complete the piece. Now, if we look again at our model from last lesson, A Hope for Peace, originally by Chitao, the last thing that was added here was the seals and the inscription, and then probably a layer of black dots, perhaps the geese, then the sky, and then keep working backwards, removing the washes, the dots, the shading, the bridge, the figure, the branches, until you get down to the very bones of this piece are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different rocks. Can you find the rocks? This is further delineated in the handout that comes with this lesson.
And I'm going to give you a demo. I've painted a set of rocks with shading and washes and dots, and I'm going to play it backwards so you can get a sense of looking and removing things to get down to the basics structure of it.
So here is a model of 5 rocks. Can you first find those 5 rocks? And then begin mentally to be removing what was the last layer added. That would be the dots, and then the shading, and then the washes, until you get down to the basic structure. Let's watch and see this piece played backwards and removing it piece by piece. So now here is our model without the dots. You can more clearly see the structure and the shading. What would be the next thing that you would remove? Now, with the wash all removed, you can more clearly see each individual rock and its shading. Next, we'll remove the shading. Finally, we are down to the bones. The bones, the structure of this piece. Now, can you anticipate which would be the last rock drawn, the one before that, and the one before that, down to the first one? So here is our original piece put back together. Outline, shading lines, wash, and dots. So this time, let's start at the very beginning, and we'll start with our outline and determine which is sort of the master rock, which is the host rock, which is in front, which is behind, which is in the middle, and find the progression of how to paint these rocks. Now that we have the outlines, let's begin to find where do the shading lines go, how do they support the strength of the outline, how do they add texture and depth to each form. Now that the shading lines are in place, to put in some of the wash, a middle gray, more of a swiping with the brush, loose, getting some rough texture, but weighting it to the base of the rock so you have a low center of gravity. And lastly, putting in the dots. This is the fun part of the project. This is like dessert, and it's best to hold it until the end. Start placing them in to one would be to strengthen any place that has some weakness. Also, I'm using them here to blur the clarity of the outlines and to sort of obliterate the structure. But watch closely, watch the progression, uh, working different areas, paying attention to both gathering the dots, scattering the dots, thickening, thin. Um, take a good look.
So that's our demo for this week. You may want to try that yourself, building the rocks up from their outlines to their shading lines to the wash to the dots. If you wish to do a little bit more, you can go back to A Hope for Peace, and particularly using the PDF that I have attached with this lesson to decipher, going backwards from what was last put on the painting, removing that and that and that, and getting down to those basic rock forms, those basic tree forms. Next week I will give a full demo of building that painting from scratch. So have a good week. Bye-bye.
Before you go, one last note. The handouts for the Dance of the Eye and the Hand for beginning students and continuing students, all lessons, are posted as downloadable PDFs at www.laughingwatersstudio.com. Have a good day. You have been watching Distance Learning from Laughing Waters Studio.